Hello and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined as always by Dakota Lasky. Dak, how you doing, man?
I am doing absolutely fantastic. Always down to talk some more Metroid with you, man. So, doing great.
Yeah, I'm super pumped again to be back. We had some really good feedback about our Metroid movie episode last week. Some really interesting pitches. Did you hear anything that you'd want to invest some money from DAC Studios into?
Well, now that you bring that up, yeah, a couple people I remember talked about like who they wanted to play certain characters. Now I'm gonna have to scroll down my Twitter real quick to see if I can like find it. But I know someone had suggested.
Mads Mikkelsen.
Yes, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Mads Mikkelsen for Adam. I was like, wow, that's like a very, very good pick that I just didn't think of at all. And so I love that. I think that was the best thing I saw. So
yeah, that was great. And I just finished Death Stranding not that long ago, and he was so good in that, and it really is good in everything. Hannibal is unbelievable. That would be a wicked casting choice, I think. I would definitely invest some money into that. But we are here today to talk about Metroid Prime 4 and kind of its weird, unprecedented, really, delay that it got. But before we jump in there, I did want to just quickly chat about a few quick fun things. So I've been playing. I've had some extra time off here lately, and I've been playing some Metroid games. And I think I said last week that I finally finished Federation Force. Mm-hmm. So I'm finally done that game, and I'm going in between two new Metroid games. I'm replaying Metroid for the NES, mm-hmm. which I am convincing some of my peers over at Zelda Dungeon to play as well. And for the first time, probably since it came out, I started Metroid Prime Hunters.
Love that game. Love that game.
I can't wait to dive deep into Metroid Prime Hunters, because just like with Federation Force, I have a lot of thoughts already about this game. I'm only 2 missions in, but still, it's just there's a lot of meat on the bone, I think, for us to dissect.
Oh, absolutely. Hunters is such a game that I cherish a lot, and I do think it's a little unfortunate that we can't play Hunters and it's Prime. Well, I guess no pun intended, but you know what I mean. When Hunters was first out, when people really were playing it online and all that kind of stuff, the original time of the game was so good and a lot of fun. So I'm glad that you're playing it again. I should honestly replay it again. I'm sure it's in my room somewhere, but that's actually a really good idea because I love that game and I'm looking forward to talking about it in depth very soon.
Yes, I can't wait because I think that my perspective of Hunters back then is very different from it now.
Okay.
So there's a lot of meat on the bone. And speaking of bone, actually, Dak, this isn't Metroid related at all. But man, I had a fun time. The two of us were hanging out watching Wrestlemania last night. What about that Boneyard match? Undertaker, AJ Styles.
What not about that Boneyard match? I mean, I gotta say, no joke, that was the most I've enjoyed anything wrestling related in so long. I was so into it. We were all having a great time, laughing and cheering it on. It was so good. It was perfect. It was 10 out of 10. It was the perfect amount of cheesy and funny and actiony. And AJ is so good. And honestly, I really thought, Undertaker super impressed me, especially from recent matches where everyone's oh, he's over the boat. He's super washed. He was perfect in that. He was so good, so good. I feel like we should have a wrestling podcast too, because I could talk for hours just about that one match, and then more hours for the whole show. And there's more tonight. It was so good. Highly recommend it if you can find it on the internet somewhere. I'm sure you can, or bits and pieces of it. Watch that match. It was awesome. A biker taker, come on, man. It was so sick. So good. Loved it.
It was good stuff. We were watching with a couple non-wrestling fans too, and
yeah.
Even they're just this is wild. I bring that up because I feel like the Undertaker from that Boneyard match would be the perfect boss in Metroid Prime 4. just something. It was so ridiculous and outrageous that I loved it, and I'm glad that we got to watch that together because that was truly a once in a lifetime kind of an experience.
It really was. Yeah, it really was.
All right, let's get into it today. Let's dive into Metroid Prime 4, mm-hmm. and what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of walk you through a timeline about everything that we know about Metroid Prime 4 up until its delay. We're going to talk about our reactions, and we're going to offer some insight about some very interesting things that happened along the way. Like, we don't really know a lot about Prime 4, but like what we do know is already so fascinating that I think that this is already going to go down in Nintendo lore as like one of their most I guess fascinating is the best word for it. Fascinating games. Like, just the developmental cycle of this is unprecedented. But let's go all the way back to the beginning. E3 2017, and Metroid Prime 4 is released. The logo comes across the screen. Dak, what take us back. What were your reactions and thoughts when you saw that? I mean, obviously both of us were jazzed, but like walk us through how you were feeling.
Well, I mean, seeing anything Metroid wise is exciting, and I even remember when like Other M when that trailer first came out, I was like, that was so cool, not knowing what it was gonna end up being. But anytime like a Metroid trailer comes out, I feel like it's always exciting, or like the mention of a Metroid title. And of course, Metroid Prime 4 is something that like a lot of people had been hoping for and thought it was gonna happen, and to see it really like actually announced in and of itself, because it's a Prime game and we hadn't had them for so long, I was completely blown away. But at the same time, it was really just like that in the moment, like excitement, like, oh my god, they're actually making it. It really didn't go anything beyond that, because obviously it was just like the logo. But you can give me a little bit of a fanfare and the logo, and that's it. And I just the four or whatever it is, like, and you're good. And I was so happy. It was awesome, and it gave me some hope. It was a bright light in a dark time. So I loved it.
Yeah, what a way to put it. I remember actually writing an article, which maybe we'll dive into in long form sometime on the podcast here, and it was called "The Metroid Conundrum." And when I wrote it, we had not had the announcement of Metroid Prime 4, and
Right.
actually, we also got the announcement of Samus Returns that same E3. Although, in telling you almost everything you need to know about how Nintendo views Metroid, it was announced after the presentation during the Treehouse Direct Live thing or whatever, their live play. So it wasn't announced during the big show, and that's kind of another reason why Samus Returns maybe didn't do the numbers that it potentially should have. But I remember seeing Metroid Prime 4, and I was just like, oh my god, this is it. Like, I've been waiting 10 years for a new Metroid game. And at the time, I was thinking like, okay, so the first year of the Switch, we've got Breath of the Wild, we've got Mario Odyssey, we've got Splatoon. Like, maybe Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a year 2 or a year 3 kind of a title to like hold us over, cuz like we got enough to keep us going for right now. So I was incredibly excited. But what that announcement told me was that the game, if at all, was barely getting started in development. And it's very un-Nintendo like to show just like a logo of something and say that they're working on it. Bethesda is kind of renowned for that, and I'm pretty sure that they did that. They said that they were working on the Elder Scrolls 6. They said they're working on that Starbound game or whatever it's called, but like nothing's actually done. They just showed us the logo. So I feel like that's kind of the same thing with Metroid Prime 4. At E3 2017, Metroid Prime 4, I don't believe was very far along into development, if into development at all. Like, I'm sure that they had plans that said that like, we're going to make this game, this is kind of the style, this is the rough story, this is what we want to do. But like, in terms of actually wiring something together, in terms of like even footage, I really don't think that they were there yet, and that if they were, we would have seen something beyond just the title. Does that sound like kind of fair in your eyes?
Oh,
Ears,
for
I
for
guess.
yeah, for sure. Like, definitely when I saw it, I had to think like, there's absolutely no way they've started development on this game. This is purely like a, hey, like, we're gonna do it kind of thing, like an IOU, like, all right, like, it's gonna happen, don't worry about it. And I think they knew that was enough. Like, that's probably why they kind of just announced it ahead of time, even though it is kind of un Nintendo like. I think with Metroid Prime, because it's a franchise that isn't like a guaranteed sell, like Zelda or Mario or Pokemon, for a lot of Nintendo, well, console owners or whatever it is. Just getting it out there and like giving hope to people who might actually care already, I think was something that might have been out of character, but was probably the right thing to do. And also, by the way, yeah, you were right that they announced Samus Returns on the Treehouse, I thought that was funny because I remember distinctly being so excited for Metroid Prime 4 that 20-30 minutes later, I then remembered, oh yeah, there was another Metroid game. Like, imagine having
Yeah.
that problem where you have too many Metroid games to even like keep on like the forefront of your mind. Like, wow, you're so excited for one, you completely forgot that there's actually two Metroid games coming out. Of course, one much earlier than the other. But yeah, I distinctly remember like completely almost forgetting about Samus Returns and then going back and like, oh wow, yeah, there's actually this Metroid game that has gameplay I can look at right now. I was just so ecstatic for Prime 4, and I think they knew like Metroid Prime is a name, or just the 4 where like you can do that and get away with it because it has that pedigree as a name. Like Metroid Prime, like it's going to be a good game. Like I mean, not necessarily like just because it happened in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen in the future, but track record wise, Metroid Prime's been pretty solid. So it's a title that when you see it, or if there's something related to it, of course it's going to get people excited regardless. I think they kind of knew that. Yeah, but it is a good point how they treat Metroid, where Samus Returns, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, Samus Returns, like wow, a Metroid 2 remake like on the 3DS, like that's actually like pretty awesome and wild. Like surprising you didn't have like a whole trailer for that.
Yeah, and to put it into perspective, so E3 happens in June, and Samus Returns is announced in June and releases in September of that year. So like it was a very short turnaround time, which is strange because like in hindsight booking here, what I would have done is like had my trailer for Samus Returns, have the release date pop up, like get it in the presentation, get people excited about that, and then I would have had the teaser for Metroid Prime 4 at the end. And actually, this is a whole like different path that we're going to go down, but and we won't go down on this episode, but we will in the future. I would have actually had Samus Returns come out for the Switch, and I would have charged full price for it. And I bet you that it would have done more numbers than it did on the 3DS if it had. But I guess that's not really a topic for today. It was kind of it was awesome the way that they announced Metroid Prime 4. It wasn't like the main event of the presentation per se. It was kind of in the middle of the show, but yeah, I just remember being absolutely just stoked, but also thinking that it was probably going to be a while before we actually saw the game.
For sure.
Because again, it's just very un-Nintendo like. Let's fast forward to November 2018, where Reggie Fils-Aimé is basically saying something along the lines and confirming what we thought. So he was quoted as saying, and I'm gonna kind of lightly quote what he said here. He basically said something akin to, "We typically only show games that are 6 to 9 months out, but we knew that there was a desire and a high demand among Metroid fans for Metroid Prime 4. So basically, we made the exception to show people that we're working on this game, to let them know that like it is coming." So I always thought that was really cool that they did that, because like again at the time it's been 7 years since Other M, and we had Federation Force come out, which was a disaster. So it really did feel nice to just be assured that like, okay, Nintendo does know that there are some diehard Metroid fans out there that are really clamoring for a new title. So I remember reading that, and that gave me a little bit of hope in terms of how Nintendo sees Metroid.
Yeah, this was right. I think this was right before Ultimate came out, and this had been a few months since like Ridley was announced for Ultimate, and I'm pretty sure at this point Dark Samus was also known to exist as well. I think at the same time. So like this is you have two Metroid characters being added to Smash. You have Samus Return's been out for over a year now. So at that point, for me, it was like, I'm already feeling really good. Like, the best I probably have as a Metroid fan in a long time. So when I saw that statement, I do remember feeling very similarly, like, yes, like, they still are, it's not just, like, kind of lip service. They're actually still working on it, which this could still be lip service, too. And, it was, I guess, to some degree, because I ended up, delaying development, but still, it was nice to like have it mentioned. And I think it's also like it's interesting because so many other franchises that Nintendo owns, like they have new information and news coming out for games like almost all the time. And like looking at this timeline, we're getting like drip fed like bare like morsels of stuff, but that's still enough for me because I'm like, damn, it's better than nothing. Like I would love to be getting new games and new info all the time, like all these other Nintendo fans. So at least like someone comes out and mentions Metroid, because there are a bunch of games that don't even get mentioned. So this was great to have like new characters in Smash. We know Metroid Prime 4 is coming out. Samus Returns was out. Reggie's talking about Metroid. Like, I feel like you couldn't feel any better at this point. This is like peak Metroid fan excitement right now in like the current Metroid era. So this was definitely another high point for sure, along with the timeline for what it's worth.
Yeah, that's a great point too, actually, that we skipped over. So E3 2018, I believe that like Ridley was actually like the main event announcement in that game or in that presentation, was he not? Because we had the trailer for Smash Ultimate where everyone is here, and then like they capped it off with Ridley finally coming into Smash. I remember losing my mind over that. That was a huge moment.
Yeah, that was the last thing that you saw before they went into, the treehouse segment. And yeah, I lost my mind there. Like, I was at work and I like absolutely lost my mind. The most exciting thing of my life. It was great. I wanted Ridley since forever. Everyone knows how much I love like Ridley and wanted Ridley in Smash. So having him finally in Smash was so amazing, so perfect. It was too late, but better late than never. It should have happened years ago. But yeah, that was an exciting part too. So like, you kind of put that all together, when you're going into the end of 2018, there's a lot of good news for Metroid fans overall. I mean, maybe if you're not a Smash fan, then I guess the Ridley and Dark Samus stuff in Smash isn't like too much for you, but at the very least you could appreciate that like more representation for Metroid in some kind of media at all is good. So, still definitely a good time.
Yeah, 100%. Like you nailed it. Even if you're not a Smash Bros fan, if you don't like Smash Bros, like it's kind of like a status symbol almost, having
Yeah.
X amount of characters in there. So yeah, I totally agree. And by the end of 2018, we're feeling pretty good. In that same November 2018 interview, Reggie is quoted as saying, internally, we have expectations about when Metroid Prime 4 is going to be released. We haven't announced it yet, but yeah, the game is well into development. So like 2018 ends, we're feeling pretty good. We're going into 2019 and we're just like, could we get some Metroid Prime 4 news at the next direct, maybe a trailer, maybe a release date. Like I think that we were all thinking that we were going to see it at E3 2019 when the calendar rolled into 2019. However, we have the absolute bombshell. January 25th, Metroid Prime 4 is delayed indefinitely, and Nintendo's Shinya Takahashi came out and basically says that the game, as it is, has failed to meet the company's standards for a Metroid Prime sequel, and Nintendo didn't want to disappoint fans with a lackluster release. The company will hire Retro Studios, the development team behind the original Metroid Prime trilogy, to help with Metroid Prime 4 and rebuild the game from the ground up, which essentially means restarting development from the beginning, so the completion of the game will be delayed from our initial eternal plan. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack with this announcement. Let's start with the obvious. What was your reaction to hearing this?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how it went down exactly, because I know the announcement was made, and I remember there being rumors about who was involved and why it was being like done over. And I don't remember if those rumors were out before or after the announcement. But that being said, when I remember when I heard the announcement that it was going to be delayed, I honestly wasn't really bothered at all, because I know what happens when a bad Metroid game comes out. So if you're going to delay the game because it's not up to your standards, then take all the time you want, right? I was happy
Right.
that like, well, I wasn't happy that it was going to be delayed, and obviously I wanted to come out as soon as possible. And that development wasn't going great obviously sucks, but that they're being very like, aware of the quality that is expected of this kind of game and what people are looking forward to. And, we haven't had a proper Metroid game or even a proper, Metroid Prime game in so long to work on the game now, like over a decade later. You really got to be doing all you can to make it worthwhile, like not just to kind of like half-ass it. So like
Yeah.
if you're gonna do it, you might as well do it right. And so I appreciated that they were gonna make sure that they were gonna have it done right. The delay sucked, but I was happy. Like, wow, great! They're actually really treating this with like a lot of like the due diligence they should be doing, and like really want to make sure that it's an A+ game. So I wasn't really disappointed, other than the fact that yeah, maybe I'm gonna have to wait a little longer to play it.
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack in that announcement that it took me. Obviously, I was incredibly disappointed, and I was like, it's been so long, and now it's probably going to add years to the release date of Metroid Prime 4. But I'm also kind of the same way where I'm like, you know what? A lot of studios would have basically just tried to course correct and patch it up and released
Hmm.
kind of a game that maybe they knew wasn't a 10 out of 10, but they could fix it up and they could make it a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. And to me, it was great that Nintendo wasn't willing to do that. They were just like, this is a 10 out of 10 game or bust, because I
Right.
feel like Metroid doesn't sell, like you said, it's not an automatic seller like a Zelda or Pokemon or Donkey Kong. So like I think that the quality of Metroid has to be at that really high level in order to facilitate the sales that it gets. Like all of the best selling Metroid games are also the best Metroid games, and the worst selling Metroid games are the worst Metroid games. It's like I feel like there's a direct link with the Metroid series between quality and how well it sales. So my initial thought was like, okay, really disappointing, but take all the time that you need and make the game and release it, and it'll be perfect when it comes out. And I still feel that way, but moving beyond that, it's actually like it's a little bit more troubling when you think about it, because you how do I articulate this? I guess I could never see Zelda being in that same position. You know what I mean? Where like Nintendo, for it just made me wonder like, well, okay, like who's working on this game in order for Nintendo to basically come out and say like this isn't good enough, we're restarting. Like, isn't Nintendo working on this game? Like, isn't and they never really came out and said who was actually developing Metroid Prime 4. And there's a lot of rumors about who was, which we'll get to in a second. But like
Hmm.
it's just like, don't you have like don't you have hands on this? Don't you have eyes on this? Like, how did it get to this point? And you can kind of go back and make the argument that like the same thing happened with Metroid Prime, the original, and what a troubled development that was. But I was a little bit concerned because I was like, how did it get to this point where like we need to completely scrap everything and restart? So that was a little bit worrying. And then I started thinking too, like the Switch is on such a hot streak. Like I hope that that hot streak is still intact by the time that Metroid Prime 4 releases, because I feel like Prime 4 is like the opportunity to kind of level up the Metroid series. You know what I mean? So like there was a lot to unpack there, I feel like, in that announcement, where like I kind of felt like you did, but then as I thought about it more, I was like, this is also a little bit concerning.
Hmm. So twofold there. For me, I think it's hard to compare with like Zelda because other games, like, because they're made more often and more frequently, they have so many more like foundational components to work with, past games and engines and employees that have worked on these games. Where if a Zelda game like Breath of the Wild 2, for example, like somehow like fell out of development, they had to restart it, they can build on the foundation of Breath of the Wild, of Skyward Sword, of all these previous Zelda games that have come out recently. They could take from it and really kind of get back on track a lot easier. This game is being built from the ground up, from as far as we knew, a completely new team that was completely detached from the old assets, the old team, the old timeline, everything. And a game making a sequel to a game 13 years later. So I think it's a little more understandable that they are going to end up having to start over if things don't go well. Actually, for me, I would have been more worried if Reggie came out and said, "Yeah, everything's good, don't worry about it," because I'd be like, "How is everything good? Like, you guys haven't made a Metroid Prime game in 13 years, or at the time 11 years, whatever it is." And you're telling me everything's all hunky dory. Like, there's no way. Like, at the very least, like, don't tell me anything at all. But I like that they came out and said, like, okay, they're restarting this. This isn't gonna like go the way we're initially working on it, or how we planned it. We're starting it over. That made sense to me and was reasonable because I knew that they're making this from the ground up. They're making it from nothing, essentially. So I wasn't necessarily worried. I actually was kind of like, all right, cool. Like, that makes sense. Like, that seemed good. If they came out and said, yeah, everything's totally good, that I'd be a little worried about. The second point you said of, trying to kind of strike the iron while it's hot on the Switch's, hot streak. definitely a good opportunity to release, I think, any game when the system's hot. But at the same time, if you release the game towards the end of the life cycle, you're gonna have like more potential users at that time. You're gonna have more potential people who have bought the system over the course of those years. People aren't gonna be throwing out their Switches after the hot streak of people buying it the first 3 years. Like they're gonna still have them. So if anything, I feel like the install base will be higher towards the end of the life cycle potentially, or it should be. So Prime 4 might have the benefit, maybe not necessarily of striking earlier when Odyssey and Breath of the Wild and whatnot did, but it'll be at the end where there might be a larger install base, a larger user base, and they can really kind of, reel in the benefits of that. And there's so many more people that have the Switch. That means a lot more people that are going to be potentially buying and playing Metroid Prime 4 when it comes out. And they already have the confidence of the Switch having good games on it already. They might already own it. They might be into Metroid more now, etc. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing on either thing. That's just me though.
You know what? You made a great point about the install base rising as time goes on, but like, my only counter to that, which I feel maybe it's an anomaly, but like, Nintendo has this weird thing where the later in its console's life the game releases, the worse it does. And a good example of that is like Other M, or let's say Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Like the Wii sold 100 million units, but like those games did considerably worse than Metroid Prime 3 or Twilight Princess, or those games that were just released before. So maybe like I think you have a good point, and I think you could be right, but also like there is a little bit of worrying history, I guess, on that side too, that tells us like maybe there's something about Nintendo consumers that are just like, okay, like, well, maybe we've got our fix now. We don't need to buy any more games. I don't know, but it was a little bit worrying to me.
That's true, actually. Yeah, I was kind of trying to look on like the bright side of it, I guess, on that account. But that being said, well, I think if I remember, didn't Skyward Sword like need like the Motion Plus to be played, or maybe yeah. So like, didn't that like limit the amount of people that ended up buying the game because like maybe they didn't have that? Though I guess it got packaged with it too, so I guess not. And you could be right. Other M, I don't know. Maybe Metroid is just like not like it wasn't like selling well already, so maybe like it really compounds that issue for more niche franchises. For Skyward Sword being affected by it, I don't know. Yeah, so you could be right there. I mean, you're definitely not wrong in that having Metroid Prime out earlier in the Switch's life cycle would probably be good, but I don't think it should hurt that much. I think at the end of the day, like if when Metroid Prime 4 comes out and like people are still gonna have the Switch. I don't know, like if Nintendo's planning like a successor to the Switch at all right now. So I feel like Metroid Prime 4 should still hopefully come out reasonably, not too late in the life cycle of the console, but we'll see. But yeah, I think that is something to keep in mind. Like the longer we wait for the game, maybe the less people that might end up potentially playing it. Who knows?
God, can you imagine if the next system was like the Switch U or something stupid
The
like
Swooch.
that? Yeah, I don't think you're wrong either. I think, like, generally speaking, more units sold means a greater chance for your game to do well. So, we'll see, I guess. I was trying to rack my brain and think if this had ever happened before, and I'm sure that there's been many a time where like a game isn't going well, and they've like restarted development on it, but like I wonder if it's ever happened so publicly before, and it makes me think like wow, Nintendo it's just another thing for Metroid that Nintendo like just got wrong, even though they were trying to do right. They came out and told everybody way before they probably should have that Metroid Prime 4 was in development and that people were working on it, and it totally just backfired right in their face in terms of like how this game is actually turning out. It's like it kind of made me wonder. I'm like, do I remember a game like this ever before? And you mentioned Breath of the Wild. It actually kind of made me somewhat think of that, even though I think that game's delay was mostly because they were porting it to Switch. But like when Breath of the Wild got delayed, it went dark for like a year, and we didn't hear about it until I want to say E3 2016. So that's the only other example of a game like that had this very public delayment, and almost like we're scrapping this. Like there have been plenty of projects before that have been canceled, but like never. I just can't think of anything like this. Can you?
No, I really can't. Maybe because I'm still like looking a lot at Metroid specifically, but yeah, I can't really think of like a Nintendo game that has specifically sounded so much like this. And, I think when you end up looking at, a lot of Metroid games or a lot of Nintendo games in general, yeah, they kind of have that very smooth, like, development course for the most part. Like Nintendo kind of
Yeah.
wants to keep things like very like clean and there's no issue here. So you don't really hear about it very often. Where I think you do hear about it a lot more from like third party studios or on other platforms. You kind of hear more about like the ups and downs and trials and tribulations of the development cycle. Nintendo, yeah, it's kind of very patchwork and clean. So yeah, I really can't think of too much, and I think also it's even more so extenuated from it's Metroid Prime, a game series we haven't seen in a while. So like for it to be a development of game that like, of course it happens with this game, right? Like we can't just have the clean development; it has to have with this. I can't really think of like such a high profile game that is, at least in recent memory, that has had. I hope people maybe after they listen to the episode on Twitter have some good examples of maybe their favorite games that were developing and then weren't in history. And interestingly enough, I feel like Retro Studios was also one of those, not very recently, but when they originally were involved in Metroid Prime, they were working on, what was it, like Raven Blade, I think it was called, and like some other games that
Yeah.
they were trying to put on GameCube and ended up working on Metroid Prime. And who knows what they were working on before they were asked and tapped to work on Metroid Prime 4. I don't remember. I'm not sure if anyone potentially knew what they were working on at the time. So I feel like that's actually kind of it's a little bit of a tradition for Metroid. The development has to kind of something has to start over or get canceled or something for a Metroid game to be made. Some sacrifice needs to be made for our
It makes
precious
me think of
games.
that old Nickelback song. Just when things are looking good for Metroid, something's got to go wrong because you're feeling too good about it. I'm from Alberta. Nickelback's from Alberta. Everybody, don't send me any hate tweets for referencing them. I'm
Nickelback's
sorry.
not that bad. It's
You know
everyone
what?
likes to
I
hate on
agree.
Nickelback, but everybody sings along to Photograph. Okay,
Right?
Hero's a banger. That's all I'm saying.
Rockstar.
Right? Yeah,
That's what I'm
exactly.
saying. Let us know what you think of Nickelback at Omega Metroid Pod.
Should Nickelback do
Okay.
the next Metroid Prime 4
Yes.
soundtrack?
Yes.
How
God, can
sick
you
would
just
that be?
imagine Chad singing along to? Oh man.
You remember how like in Halo 2 they had like Incubus and like Breaking Benjamin on the soundtrack? That's what they got to do with Metroid Prime 4. They need like Nickelback and like Imagine Dragons.
Those seem like the bands that Nintendo would hire too. Like they're trying to be hip, so they're like, yeah, I know kids like Nickelback, right?
Oh, that would be so good.
That's very
So bad it
Nintendo.
would be good.
All right, so we're still in January 25th here, and we're still on the delay. There's a lot of reverberating parts that's coming from this. One thing that I thought was key from Takahashi's announcement is like they they basically just publicly bury the developer of Metroid Prime 4 and say like this isn't going as well as it should. We're not satisfied. It's not good. We're restarting, and now we have a new developer. So like they never explicitly say who it is, but like man, they drag them. Like they really just drag them and make them look bad. So like I can't imagine that Team Ninja is back in any form or fashion after the whole Other M debacle. Um, Mercury Steam made the really celebrated Samus Returns. So like, and I feel like if they were working on a Metroid game, it would be probably a 2D Metroid, maybe another remake, maybe Metroid 5 or something along those lines. So like, it just makes me wonder like who's working on this game and why isn't it Nintendo? Because I can't see Nintendo dragging their own teams like that in public. So there's a couple rumors floating out there that maybe it was Bandai Namco and their Singapore studio, but it that's like such an interesting question to me is like who did they get to do this game that it went so badly that Nintendo really just like kind of blasted them in public like this.
Yeah, it's interesting you said they dragged and blasted them because like I definitely don't agree. They didn't even name them, so how could you drag them? Like I have no idea who it was. So how like I feel like they are kind of it wasn't going great.
They were polite
Yeah, they were
about it for
polite,
sure.
but it's
Yeah.
like they didn't. We have no idea who it is. And you mentioned Bandai Namco. What I remember reading at one point that it wasn't just like Singapore studio; it was like multiple studios. They had like this Bandai Namco studio working on this portion of the game, and Singapore working on this portion of the game, and this studio working on that portion of the game. And I mean, I swear I read this in at least one or two like rumor articles, whatever it was. It was all rumors, all speculation, but that piece of information stuck out to me because I felt like, well, that's obviously why development probably wasn't going well. I mean, there are tons of games that have been developed by different teams or having like the
Right.
multiplayer and the single player worked on by different teams, whatever it is. So that's certainly not out of the question and has historically led to sometimes issues in many games because, the quality will suffer on one part of the game or the other. They might not have enough resources. They might not have the know-how or the technical precision to really do their part of the game compared to the other side. So when I heard that and I heard, wow, there are 3 or 4 different Bandai Namco studios working on this game, no wonder they restarted development. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. So if that is true, I wouldn't be surprised. That's kind of where they went with it, where maybe they decided, even though they wanted to make this Metroid Prime 4 game, they still maybe didn't want to go all in, right? So they kind of, worked with a studio that had like all these different assets around the world to try and start like working on it in different bits and pieces. But then when they, left it to cook and to incubate and whatnot and let the developers have their way, and then they came back and they saw, oh, this isn't going well. This part of the game is not doing great here, or this is not doing well here, and whatever. It's just a mess. Let's just scrap it. That would make sense to me. I think that's probably where it went. I don't think maybe it was just one necessarily like one individual studio. I can see them as portioning it off to one developer to another developer. I don't think it was Team Ninja. I definitely don't think they would have done that. Mercury Steam, I don't think so either. They still don't seem to be working on like that kind of a scale of a game. So, yeah, why they wouldn't just start like doing it like under their own roof? Like, if they're gonna go out of their way to even make Metroid Prime 4 at all, like I was saying earlier, why not like you got to make it a 10 out of 10 game? You can't like slack. But if that's the case, then why would they give development to start off with on these multiple studios who end up having to scrap it?
Yeah,
So I don't know,
exactly.
it's hard. Yeah, it doesn't, without all the details, it's so hard to parse it and try and figure it out. But that seemed to make sense to me, but still I don't know why Nintendo would do it in the first place.
Yeah, totally. Like it's a conundrum because I must have read the same thing because originally I read it was Singapore Studios and then it was like the Japanese studio and then it was like all these different divisions of Bandai Namco making this game. And like first of all, I'm thinking to myself like, okay, what has Bandai Namco made that tells me that they can make a good first person adventure game? And nothing really comes to my mind. And like I did a quick little Google search of their games and what they're like really known for. And again, nothing really inspires confidence. And I'm not saying that you necessarily have to have like experience making a game in the same genre, but it does help. So I wonder why again, Nintendo was like, okay, let's trust someone else to make this really big game. And then like I get that Metroid Prime 4 isn't gonna sell Pokemon numbers or Zelda numbers, but like still, it's gonna be a very important game, I think, for a niche part of your audience. So it did strike me as weird. I think you're right. If they had tons of hands of the cookie jar, I could definitely see how that went wrong. And it just makes me wonder, like, okay, why didn't we just go to Retro Studios in the first place? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like they're not working as far as we know, they weren't working on anything during this time period. The last game that they released was Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, and that was 6 years ago. So like, why didn't we just go to them in the first place?
Well, there was another thing I heard too, where, and again, I don't remember if this was in the same article, if this is true or not, or where I heard it from, but because it all kind of blends together, it's been a while. But I remember that it wasn't even just like Nintendo going to Retro and be like, hey, salvage this. It was they were having issues with development, and Retro came to them and said, hey, we have this cool idea for Metroid. Let us work on it again. And Nintendo was like, oh, wow, that's so convenient because screw this. What's happening?
Yeah.
Like that's what I remember reading. So I was like, wow, that would have been, that's like a perfect storm almost kind of thing there where, you'd be able to jump in and say, oh, hey, this isn't going very well, or maybe they didn't even know it was going very well, but like coincidentally, the Retro shows up and says, hey, we have a great idea for Metroid game, just as it so happens Nintendo's having troubles working on, or whatever studio it is working on that game already. Um, yeah, so maybe that's how it ended up going. Like maybe Retro just was kind of in the right place at the right time, and was able to strike when needed. But yeah, at the same time though, I think Bandai Namco wasn't like, if it is true that they were working on it, I don't think it's necessarily like the craziest thing that Nintendo would lean on them to do it. Like they've had to lean on them for games previously. They were involved with Smash. So, I mean, if you give them Smash, then you can trust them to work on Metroid. I think they probably saw that. And, thinking about recent Nintendo IPs and games, if you remember back to Splatoon, the original development of that came from the Animal Crossing team, who, as far as I know, had no experience with first person shooters or third person shooters for Splatoon, and they ended up creating a really fantastic series. So,
That's actually pretty cool. I didn't know that.
yeah. So, if you look at it that way, I don't think it necessarily would have barred them out. But yeah, it does kind of make you think, like, why wouldn't they just gone to developing themselves at first, or go to Retro first, or go to. I thought that maybe Platinum might be behind Metroid Prime 4. So I thought maybe they'd be working with them. So yeah, again, hard to know, but I do think that maybe Retro kind of just swooped in at like the 11th hour at the time and was like, hey, I don't know if any of you will have, remember this idea, but if you've read like Metroid wikis, the Metroid 1.5 thing, that concept idea that kind of led to Metroid Prime 2 that Retro developed at one point. One of my favorite things to read on the Metroid wiki Troid, but maybe they came out with that. That would have been cool to mention things from Metroid 1.5. But anyway, yeah, maybe just Retro just kind of came in at the right time. Nintendo was having issues, and it worked out. And now they're behind the wheel.
A potential casualty of this as well is I heard rumors, and you probably heard the same rumors too, that Retro was working on like a Star Fox racing game. Did you hear that?
I do remember that, yeah, because that was another E3 rumor, I think, too, which was like
Yeah.
a Star Fox like F-Zero kind of racing game.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I gotta be honest, when I heard that, I was like, yes, necessary
I was
sacrifice.
just like, yes. I thought that would be cool, but like, yeah, I feel like
Oh, it would
that
have been cool.
if it ever existed, is definitely no more. All right, so let's finally fast forward the timeline here. The next bit of news that we get, or the next bit of noteworthy news that we get, I should say, is April 2019. We see an ad from Retro Studios that they are hiring an art director for Metroid Prime 4. Now, we see Retro Studio ads that, on their Twitter account. It's not used for news, it's mostly just used for job postings and stuff like that. But I thought that this one was actually noteworthy because to me, an art director is like kind of a big deal and like the pre-planning of a game, because if you don't have your art direction down, then you can't start coding and creating the different worlds, the different enemies and stuff like that. So this kind of told me that we're really really behind. Like we're starting, and I know that they said that they were starting from scratch, but like they're not using anything that they had from the original development. So um it told me like, you can spend up to like you could spend probably a year easy just mapping out the art direction for how you want to make this game. So it tells me that like we're still a couple years away from Metroid Prime 4 seeing the light of day.
Yeah, you're probably right. I know nothing about game design and game development, so what do I know about if they're hiring something or not? And definitely, you can certainly glean from it that like, yeah, they're hiring someone, an art director, a role in that position might lead you to think that the game's still a long ways away. I actually took it as, oh, that's good. Like they are able to hire people, so development must be at least not going badly. That's how I took it. Whenever I see a company's hiring, it's usually like one of two things, like, oh, they've replaced a whole ton of people and they're rehiring people at lower wages, which doesn't seem to be the case with Retro. As far as we know, they have no financial issues and don't seem to be struggling in any kind of way. The other time is when companies are hiring is when things are good and they can afford to hire, they can afford to expand their team or add people who might bring in new insight. And as far as I know, games can have multiple art directors and multiples of different things. So maybe they had two solid art directors. They wanted a third solid director. They wanted a third solid art director. They wanted a fourth solid art director, whatever it is. I remember seeing this and I was like, oh, good. Like they're able to hire people, and it's not like a low position. It's an important position. So I actually kind of took that as a good thing as far as I thought. I'm like, all right, they're able to hire. They have some more flexibility potentially, and may bring in someone new to the table that can add something to the game they might not necessarily have now. I wasn't worried, but at the same time, yeah, it still kind of also made me think, we still might be a ways out, but we might not be. Maybe that's just the normal process. Like maybe they're getting closer. Maybe by adding more manpower, they're getting even closer. Not necessarily that the art director is like specifically doing things, but adding more people to the team, maybe it gets done better. Maybe it gets done more efficiently. Maybe it gets done quicker. Who knows? That's how I took it.
Actually, that's a great way of looking at it. Definitely a glass half full. And actually, let me be absolutely clear. I know even less than anybody listening about how to make a game. So like to me, like in my head when I saw that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so like if they're shooting the Lord of the Rings movie, somebody's got to draw out what the ring wraiths look like before they can actually like cast them, make the costumes, get the special effects. So to me, I was just like, oh man, like this is we're still a ways away. Like we're in the planning stages, but what you just laid out actually doesn't sound wrong at all. It sounds plausible at least, or as plausible as like, okay, we're just getting the ball rolling. So that's definitely a really nice glass half full kind of a viewpoint, and I'm glad that you said that because I hope that that's true. Okay, so we're kind of jumping to the end of the timeline here. The latest thing that I saw about Metroid Prime 4 actually happened last week, where on March 24th, an online retailer supposedly leaked Metroid Prime 4's release date, and if you can believe this, the supposed release date is October of 2020. So I don't know about that. That seems a little bit too good to be true. I think that a lot of times you have Amazon like releasing release dates that are just like completely off and they're completely wrong. A lot of them are placeholder dates. I think that this one in particular, I think it said it released on the 30th, which typically, I could be wrong here, but the light research that I did for this, typically a placeholder release date is like the first or the last day of the month. So I guess that's what gave this a little bit of credence. But man, like to me, October 2020 seems like completely unrealistic.
Yeah, I think that just I don't even know where they would have gotten that information from. Like what how could you possibly like other than being straight up told that that's what it is and it's accurate, but I don't think like from what we've seen in the development cycle, what we know, like what little we know, but still what we know kind of tells us like there's no way this game is ready in 2020 at all, October let alone. So yeah, I do think like I feel like often when I see like I think Metroid Prime 4 was also like quote unquote leaked one time on like Best Buy and like the release date was like December 31st of that year or something like that. I'm like, okay, like this is obviously like the titles just added to the site and somebody along the line, along the workflow, along the chain of command, like put in the wrong date or the system like kind of took the date from somewhere and it kind of gets, updated somehow to that. I think it was just a genuine mistake. We have no idea if it's true, and I would be so surprised if they even slightly, even remotely get close to releasing it in 2020. October 2020 would be very generous, and now and that's even at the time from what we knew at all about like what's happening, current events wise. Like I don't think anything major um, down the road won't be affected by what's happening in the world today. So that might even further
Yes.
delay a game like Metroid Prime 4. So yeah, October 20, there's absolutely no way. You quote me on that. There's absolutely no way that Metroid Prime 4, like AJ Styles will defeat The Undertaker in a Boneyard match before Metroid Prime 4 comes out in October 2020.
Shout out to that Boneyard match. If you guys are listening to this and haven't watched the Boneyard match, what are you waiting for?
It was so good. I loved it, but and that
So
see
yeah,
that's something I was waiting for Boneyard, not Boneyard Taker, wow, Biker Taker for so long, and it was so great. That's how Metroid Prime 4 is going to be. We're waiting so long, and then it fights AJ Styles in the back of a farm or whatever, and it's going to be sick. It's going to be great.
so I wasn't even going to report this or include this supposed October 2020 timeline or release date in our timeline here, but like some big sites picked up the story, like Den of Geek, Games Radar, um, Tech Radar, like a lot of different sites like reported this news, and I was the same way. I was reading this and I was like, you're out of your mind. Like there's no way.
Yeah.
That even if the game was like 90% done, you just said it. Current events in the world are going to. We've already seen it. The Last of Us 2 was just delayed indefinitely because they couldn't get distribution right. Not even because
is that why?
It's a game related issue. I mean, I'm reading between the lines. That's what I'm assuming.
Okay.
It was kind of distribution or like packaging it, but yeah. So I'm reading that and then I'm like, there's no way that this game comes out in 2020. I think 2021 is even kind of a stretch. I don't think that we see it at E3 this year. What about you?
Well,
Or not E3.
Well, I was gonna
but
say I don't think
whatever
we're
they're
gonna see
gonna
anything
have.
at E3 this
Yeah.
year. With how that went. Yeah, I think that we probably I could see getting another teaser this year. I don't think we're going to see any gameplay in 2020. I don't think we're going to see much substance of anything related to Metroid Prime 4 in 2020. I think now, like you said earlier, where they kind of like prematurely let us know about Metroid Prime 4 and kind of shot themselves in the foot by now the development is screwed up, which we wouldn't have known about had they not told us about the game existing so early in advance and going against their usual way of doing things. I think now that that's happened, they probably have learned from that, so they probably won't tell us about anything unless they're really certain that they can show it and tell us. So yeah, I'm not expecting much this year. I would love just give me 5 seconds of something, 10 seconds, maybe a short cinematic or something. Show me Samus jumping out of the ship. I don't know. Very, very little though. I really don't expect to see much until probably like early 2021. At least.
Yep, I'm with you. All right, so let's put on our absolute guessing caps here, and let's go for the fences, man. Like, if you had to guess right now when Metroid Prime 4 comes out, what do you think?
I think it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be September of. Ooh man. I think it's gonna be September of 2021. I think that's where. No, I can't say that. That even feels so early.
Man.
I think it's,
I was gonna say holiday 2022.
Yeah, that I think after I said it, I was like, damn, September 2021 is still seems very close to me. So holiday 2022 though, like that seems so far.
It seems so far.
Yeah, man. I don't know. That's so hard. I would hope. I mean, if it's good, it's good. I can wait, but I would really
put
hope
this
not
into
have
perspective.
To wait that long.
We'll have over 100 episodes of Omega Metroid podcast by holiday 2022.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm
That's
going to go with
wild.
September 2021. I hope. I'm going to be optimistic, which I usually am not when this question comes up. I think almost every time I've been asked this, I would agree with what you've said. And I've said, holiday 2022 or early 2022 or mid 2022, something like that seems like what could happen. But you know what? No. I'm going to put the positive energy out there. I want it to speak it into the world. September 2021. Please, Metroid gods. Metroid Prime 4, at least sometime in 2021 or early 2022 would be good too. Wow, too many twos. We got to move on to the next decade already. This is too much.
I'm glad that you are being the ray of light because I'm kind of being dark cloud Spiteri here, raining all over everything. But I don't know, man. I just don't think it's I don't think it's coming
you're probably
that
right.
soon.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think you're right. But I want to believe in what I've said.
I want to believe in what you've said too.
But I think you're right.
It makes me feel better that you're saying it. How about that?
Oh yeah, there you go. I gotta do what I gotta do. I'll take one for the team.
One of the most incredible, wild, and unprecedented release windows in the history of Nintendo for any game, any generation that I can think of. I can't ever remember a game like Metroid Prime 4 that was announced so early, breaking Nintendo tradition, backfired so spectacularly that they had to restart the whole thing, that Nintendo basically came out and apologized to fans. We're used to seeing them apologize for a delay, but we're not used to seeing them apologize for a game being so bad that they had to restart development. So just, man, like unprecedented is the word that I keep coming back to. So, hopefully we're talking sooner rather than later on this podcast about Metroid Prime 4 and our reactions to it and our hands-on experiences. But who knows? I guess we'll have to wait for potentially a long time. I don't even know if it's going to be shown in June, but of course we're gonna stick with it. Any piece of Metroid Prime 4 news, you can definitely expect us to cover that. Dak, anything that you want to say to kind of put a bow on this week's episode before we get out of here?
All I can say is that whatever game it ends up turning out to be, whether it's a Switch game or maybe it's a Nintendo VR game or something like that, or something crazy, I hope it's well worth it, because I've been waiting for this game for so long. I'm really ready for a new Metroid Prime game, as we all are. So I really hope we get some news, and I am looking forward to the next time we talk about Metroid Prime 4, because we've got a lot of time, it seems, and a lot to talk about on it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the next part of Mania tonight as well. Very excited about that. And maybe at the end of that show, someone comes out and lets us know when Metroid Prime 4 is coming out, and it'll be sponsored by Vince himself. So who knows? We'll see. I'm excited, though. I hope we can talk about Metroid Prime 4 again soon. And I can't wait for whatever news comes out. I hope it comes out soon. I hope it's not 2022. Hope we get it in 2021. But you're probably right. We'll see, though. And I hope, of course, Ridley's in it. Because if Ridley's not in Metroid Prime 4, heads will roll. Heads will roll. According to me, I'll be tight. But yeah, that's all I got.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I agree. I want Ridley, and I want Kraid, by God. I want it all.
Let's do it. Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's here.
Perfect way to end the show right there. So yeah, that, it's fascinating, and we hope that you guys are with us on this fascinating ride that is Metroid Prime 4 and its release, and we'll see how it turns out. We hope that this episode turned out really well. I think it did. I'm gonna give ourselves a pat on the back. We want you to check us out over on Twitter. We are at Omega Metroid Pod. I myself am at Spiteri316. Dak is at @TheRapture_. Wherever you get your podcast, Podbean, iTunes, check us out over on there. Leave us a 5-star review if you think we've earned it. Like, subscribe, and most importantly, tell a friend. If you got a Metroid fan in your life that is dying for some Metroid talk, news, anything, let them know about the Omega Metroid podcast. Shout out to our buddies over at Metroid Database for always sharing our stuff. We appreciate that. That's it for this week. We are going to be back next week. Until then, stay safe, everybody, and we will see you then.